All right, everyone, don't go anywhere. I see you leaving. We have a break right after this panel, so stick around for the panel, and then we'll take a short break. I'm really excited for you to hear from my guests. We almost perfectly coordinated our outfits, but we're only mildly mad at Anthony for interrupting it with some green. Let's bring up first Danette Leighton, the CEO of the Women's Sports Foundation. Peter Frintzilas, CEO of TeamSnap Inc. And Anthony Signorelli, Senior VP of Development and Corporate Partnerships at the Ad Council. So we have the very simple task of talking about creating a thriving, successful, and healthy environment for women and girls in sport. No biggie. Women's Sports Foundation has actually done a lot of research on the girl side of things. They're among many people who have tried to look at and understand why girls drop out of sports at such a high rate compared to boys, particularly right around the age of 13 or 14. Some of the biggest reasons: lack of access, safety and transportation issues, social stigmas, cost, decreased quality of experience, and lack of positive role models. And then when they become women, it's a lot of those same things and then a little bit more. So I want to start on how we can look at those challenges and address them in our different spaces. So let's start with you, Peter, because you do start at the beginning of an athlete's journey. TeamSnap focuses on the youth level. Can you first tell people how it works and also how it intersects with your role as a Play Sports Coalition's board of directors, because they really intersect a lot?
Yeah, so youth sports is a $37.5 billion market globally, and I don't think everybody always realizes the sheer size and scale of the industry that we're talking about. TeamSnap is a leading sport management platform, primarily focused in North America. We have over 25 million registered users, 19,000 sports organizations on our platform, and we create unique ways that brands to connect with youth sport families throughout the course of the season. I also sit on the board of the Plays Coalition, which is an advocacy group of about 3,000 sports organizations across the United States, focused on advocating for funding and budget for youth sports, both at a government, federal, and state level.
You're on the tech side. How much do you actually have to be involved with youth parents?
Well, I'm becoming one. I have 3 boys that are 6,
so we'll
4,
blame
and
you.
2, so
Yeah.
I'm drafting right in. Look, we listen to the market very heavily, right? So we're building products for parents, for families, and getting that feedback back from them in order to improve our technology is critical. And, all feedback, whether good or bad, is important.
That's right. Danette, it's sort of the whole purpose of the Women's Sports Foundation to help make the journey from girls in sport to women in sport as successful, as supported as possible, and that includes policy, advocacy, everything. So when you look at the current infrastructure for girls in sport, there are a lot of problems. Where do you see the biggest issue?
We would need more than 20 minutes. I think for many of you who don't know, the Women's Sports Foundation was founded 2 years after the passing of Title IX by Billie Jean King, and because she knew there needed to be an organization that focused on research and advocacy to protect that bill.
Advocacy is the word I meant when I said advocation, but I've been here for 4 days, and we had a party here last night till 3. So whatever words I make up, just change it to the one I meant.
We knew that she meant advocacy. Yeah. So one of the biggest challenges that people don't realize is that Title IX is threatened all the time. And I was shocked when I came from the private sector of sports into philanthropy and started recognizing how many times something, whether it's state or federal, wants to take away the rights. At the end of the day, the Women's Sports Foundation is actually a women's rights organization because everything that sports does just parallels what happens to women. So we spend a lot of time in the protection of Title IX, the amount of lack of compliance with that piece of legislation. And I would say right now we are spending a heavy amount of time in the middle of the ecosystem, which is the college model, because the college model has a lot of challenges and a lot of concerns that we are very worried about that will impact opportunities for women and potentially men's Olympic sports as well. So we're spending a lot of time in college right now.
We're going to get back to that because I want you to get into some of those issues. The Title IX one in particular was fascinating because a couple years ago when we celebrated 50 years, everyone started it as a celebration. And then they started actually researching how often it is followed. And they were like, oh, this isn't a celebration. This is a reminder that just because something is in law doesn't mean people are actually following it, because the compliance is pathetic. And you have to literally sue your school to get anything changed.
It's challenging, and it's also, we've made so much progress, and this is what I love about focusing on the youth sports side. Just to give you perspective, when it was the 50th anniversary of Title IX, which was 2 years ago, girls have the same participation that boys had in 1972 in high school. We have 1 million less opportunities to play sports at the high school level. So yay, we've made it so far, but that was 1972 we now match. Yeah. So we have a long way to go.
Anthony, the Ad Council uses their powerful storytelling to talk about a whole bunch of stuff: diabetes, safe gun storage, ending hunger, emergency preparedness, diversity and inclusion, mental health. You've worked on a lot of those campaigns, and how is it different when you're harnessing the power of sport to tell the story you want to tell?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you first, Peter. TeamSnap, I'm a dad of 3. It's amazing. Helps me and my wife navigate, so thank you. And Danette, I have 2 daughters, so the work that you're doing is so important to them.
Party at Anthony's house.
That's right, yeah. My wife wants to kill me this week. Yeah, so, I mean, if you're not familiar with the Ad Council, we bring together the marketing, media, tech, nonprofit, brand, sports communities to build these amazing, multifaceted campaigns that really drive social change. It's all about changing attitudes, changing behaviors on some of those most pressing issues. What we found in my experience working across many of the sports leagues and with athletes is that sports is really a great unifier. In the U.S., which is primarily where we work, everything can become divisive, right? Everyone has a very strong polarizing opinion. And when you deal with issues like gun safety, even mental health, it really is difficult to even start to have a conversation or get people to think differently. So sports has allowed us in many of our campaigns to really bring the fan together from that point of view and have them talk about difficult topics, to learn about topics that are important to us and to them, and to get them to really take that next step. We did something, a quick example, COVID and the vaccine became a very divisive topic at the time. And we invited athletes to have a conversation with experts as consumers, people who had questions themselves. So it wasn't about telling people what to do or using their platform to say you should be doing this or that. It was about fans seeing them as people and using their platform to ask the questions that we all had and let the experts sort of give us answers. So it's a great unifier.
Peter, obviously the success of women at the professional level starts with youth sports and very basically staying in them and continuing to play, but there are so many other elements that need work. You are basically, through your work, touching every single part of youth sports. Where do you see the most room for improvement?
Yeah, so look, the inequalities in youth sport are really a downstream representation of the inequalities in society, right, as a whole. And so at TeamSnap, we feel it's our responsibility as business partners in this ecosystem that we have to give back. And we do that in two ways, right? Kind of top down, bottom up, focus around affordability and accessibility. On the affordability side, average cost annually in the U.S. for kids to play sports is $886. Our surveys and our research say about 65% of households are challenged by that, and that's a burden. And so we give back directly through our TeamSnap Impact program, more grassroots effort, and also lobbying for state and national and federal funding, as we talked about. On the accessibility or the programming side, this is the access to sport, right? Are there enough organizations providing girls with the opportunity to play? Are there enough coaches that actually know how to coach a U11 girls team, because it's not the same as coaching a U11 boys team? And so working with coaches to help develop that skill set and the education that's needed to provide more of an equal playing field and more access.
And it feels like brands need to know those challenges and understand the biggest issues, because then they can use their platforms to address those, which is just as important as having a big superstar athlete look super fierce in a commercial where they're playing the sport, is to actually get to those issues of need. I know Gatorade is one brand that actively connects with partners to put funds back into youth sports to keep kids playing. And it's certainly something for brands to think about, is that interaction back and forth with the community as opposed to just highlighting athletes. Danette, NCAA, gosh, we could talk about it for hours. I am having trouble even keeping up with all of the different lawsuits and changes and challenges to amateurism as a principle that they've stood on for years, despite it not being accurate. NIL, all that stuff. How do you see that affecting women athletes in the near future?
Yeah, so I think I try to remind people the reason why women's sports is having a moment right now is not a coincidence. It's because that legislation, it's taken us 52 years to get to this spot, but it's really been built off of how that system aligns with our education. From a high school standpoint, a collegiate standpoint, college was really the first place where women saw an opportunity to play higher than obviously the youth level, and were able to earn their scholarships and able to obviously go, whether they're going to go become the 1% of elite athletes that you see playing in any of the leagues that were here, the panel before us, or actually what we care most about are those 99% of girls that get the leadership skills that go become the next CEO, because 94% of C-suite women played sports. with over half of them playing in college. So right now in the collegiate model, what we're concerned about, I kind of call it death by 1,000 paper cuts. It's a very complicated model of how the actual business side of college athletics works, and it's really been based on one kind of revenue stream. And our concerns in a very Cliff Notes version, which I know is a very old school term, I should say Sparks Notes now or whatever it is that have a daughter in college. AI. Oh, you're not even going to need it anymore.
Input.
That's really old school. Is the challenge is you have to look at both the economic side of the college model as well as Title IX compliance. So some of these challenges Title IX will be supportive of and protect as long as we go and spend time fighting and looking at it. So from things like NIL collectives, we're very concerned about those because we don't think they're playing within Title IX. NIL for individuals, we want women and men to earn and have the ability to earn. We think that's very strong. But with these new settlements, that means more money's coming out of where they're used to getting from the center and feeding down into the athletics department. So we're very concerned that there is going to get to a point where decisions are going to be made to potentially cut sports. And Title IX only protects equity. It does not protect what we call in college broad-based sports, which means don't forget what happens after college. That is the feeding system to Team USA, as well as pay attention to the rosters all across the world. You'll see a lot of rosters that will have where they went to school in the United States. So it all connects together in this ecosystem. We don't want that middle to take away opportunities for girls and men, and that's what we're concerned about in college.
And we know the headlines are always when the men's sports are removed, even if the men are already dominating in terms of opportunities allowed.
I think that's what's so interesting about when Title IX came out, everybody was like, oh my gosh, it's the death of these men's sports. And the irony in this certain circumstance now, everybody needs to work together. We want men and women to have these opportunities because we know how important it is for our youth and then our collegiate athletes to be able to go on and be those leaders in life. And we want them for both genders. Right. And I think for us, that's one of our frustrations is we really want to make sure college and everybody involved, and I really encourage from a brand perspective, you need to understand how to intentionally invest at every level of the women's sports ecosystem, whether it be youth, whether it be college, whether it be elite, and they all are structured differently. I'm happy to help any of you to know how to navigate it, but it's imperative that there's intentional investment so you can make sure your money goes where it needs to go.
Love it. We'll be asking for that call to action later. Anthony, Love Your Mind. You partnered with 11 professional sports leagues and orgs to create this campaign. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so talking about every level, right? An issue that we know affects every level of women's sports, sports in general, of anyone, is the mental health issue. It is a tentpole of the work the Ad Council is going to be doing from now for the next 5 or 6 years at the minimum. We received an amazing investment of $15 million from the Huntsman Mental Health Institute to really get us going and create this groundswell around solving the mental health issue in the U.S. specifically. And we built a platform called Love Your Mind. It's really a love letter from your mind, reminding you that, in addition to your physical health, especially as we think about athletes and sports, your mental health is just as important, if not more in many cases. And so through that platform, we brought together 11 major sports leagues, including, National Women's Soccer League, WNBA, we have the USTA, and all the others, with 12 different athletes really prioritizing their mental health, telling their stories, and all driving people to a resource where they can get more information about how to really prioritize your mental health, not from the standpoint of, addressing some of the mental health illness that we know exists, but how to work upstream, how to have rituals, how to take moments for yourself so that you don't get into crisis. And then if you are in crisis or you know someone who might be in crisis, to get them the resources that they need to access. So it's a very comprehensive initiative. We're looking to do more. It's really just the start of this larger program that we hope to build out more directly with teams, with athletes, and others in the community. So we're really proud of it and hope others would join us.
It's wild how early we were on this journey in sports, considering for my whole life as an athlete, we talked about positive mental attitude and envision the race. Like, it was all these ideas that stem from mental wellness. We just didn't address it in that way because of the stigmas, and now we're finally having those conversations, and sports is a fantastic place to do it because of the intersection of all the competition and pressure and rituals, all the things you said. Peter, I was surprised to learn you guys actually are very involved in policy and advocating for change. What are you mostly pushing for?
Yeah, so the professionalization of youth sport is that genie's out of the bottle, right? You debate the merit of it, that's happening. Youth sports is turning into the industrial complex and the business that it is. And what that has created is much more of a divide between the haves and the have-nots. And that's really seen and compounded at more of a local level, right? We have about 80% of local leagues and teams have not been able to bounce back out of COVID, right? And that's compounded even further when you talk about the difference between the boys and the girls leagues that have been able to come back. And so while we can do as much as we want as a company directly, only systemic change is going to help that, and we see that through funding. And so we've been advocating more to state level because nothing gets done in the U.S. at a federal level. And so there's states like Maryland, Massachusetts, Connecticut, where the governors have seen the value of youth sports and are working that into the state budget. And in some cases, we're handling the distribution of that. And then in other cases, we're going and partnering with states like New York, Illinois, who are legalizing gambling, and we've been able to advocate for a fixed percentage of all tax revenue being generated by legalized gambling being directed towards youth sports and funding. And so again, grassroots, bottom up, top down systemic change.
Danette, Women's Sports Foundation does a lot of policy work as well. What's your focus right now?
Well, I think for us, we talked a lot about the NCAA side, but every day there's a new issue within the ecosystem. I think for us, we see the same concerns on the youth side for girls. We see a lot of challenges and concerns about marginalized communities not having access. And I have to remind everybody, if you don't have access, you don't get to the top. And we really, really want to make sure that access is there. So we do a lot around access and looking at those same things, a lot of things on the federal level, which is frustrating, but we also do things on the state level. Significant amount of work at the college space, and we also have a lot of concerns in the LGBTQ plus community and what's happening there for women as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of people silo issues, and especially in women's sports, they are all intersectional. You cannot talk women's sports without talking race,
equity,
gender expression, sexuality, bodily autonomy. Like every single issue that affects women in sports, to the point of, do you compete in Texas if you're not sure if you're able to access medical care that you need? I mean, it's wild how much people silo things. And then to your point, if you don't have access, you can't get to the top. And then we look at the top and say, where's all the people we need representing us to make policy change, to put money behind things?
Exactly, and I think that's the part where we always say our work has always been a parallel to women's issues. Like sports has always had this big megaphone. We've always had this big platform. It's always been able to bring communities together. So whether it's pay equity issues, all the things you described, we have the same problems in the sports industry that parallel what's happening in society, which is why the sports industry needs to use their voices, and we as an organization, obviously for 50 years, have been doing that, and it's been powerful for me and a little, I would say, frightening to realize how much advocacy we actually have to do, but the important role philanthropy plays, because what it does is actually grows your economy. Like, people don't understand this. This is also an economic thing.
Yeah. People will be like, how do we fix people's attitude towards women's sports? I'm like, well, can we go back and start again without a patriarchy? Or is that like, can we just get people not to hate women? Because that's a start, and then we'll go from there. Anthony, social views on things change over time, and you're not advocating to tell people what to think, but you do use storytelling to help introduce the idea of thinking differently. LGBTQ plus ideas in women's sports in particular have helped grow the leagues because of the stigmas that are sort of falling away. We're letting people be authentically themselves more and more often. How does the Ad Council see its role in affecting things like acceptance of LGBTQ plus people?
Yeah, so again, our role is really focused on communications, changing attitudes, behaviors, beliefs, and we've done a lot of work in this space, not particular necessarily to sport, but in general, because there's a lot that needs to be done. Hopefully many of you are familiar with our Love Has No Labels campaign, which is all about creating an open, more accepting society. And I think one of the ways that we've used sport is to go to unexpected voices or unexpected places. So you may recall work that we did with the NFL a couple of years back in Love Has No Labels, where they took over the Kiss Cam at the Pro Bowl. And it was just a surprising piece of creative that had people thinking differently about what it means to love. We did something with John Cena, who you wouldn't expect, but is a real ally. And he delivering a message of acceptance and diversity and inclusion was something that really resonated with people. So that's part of what we try to do, is understand our audience, understand the challenges and the barriers we need to address, and then use sport and other platforms as a way to get people, as you said, to think different, to act differently, and to find the resources that we know are important.
If you have power on the Kiss Cam, can you get him to stop making brothers and sisters?
I wish.
Kiss?
I wish.
It's the worst. They keep going back. Like, no, it's real gross. Okay, we're almost out of time. So I do want, since we're in a room full of super powerful people, and that's why we're all here, is to actually move forward instead of just talking about things. I want each of you to say what you most need, whether that's from brands or potentially power players in the room. So Anthony, let's go.
Yeah, please. We need you to join us. The power of the Ad Council is really about bringing together the best in our business, and mental health is probably the most important issue we have right now. So join us, whether you're in sport or out of sport. There's a way for you to really engage with this topic, and we are really at the beginning of a major movement, and we need all of you to be a part of it.
Peter?
Yeah, look, investing in women's sports is a smart business decision. There's no question about that. We heard about the ROI on our last panel. But women's sports starts with girls' sport, full stop. And I would encourage and urge all of the brands in here to think about who you're partnering with. How can you use your budgets to influence the lives of young girls and also satisfy all the brand objectives, right? And so we partner with a number of brands to help facilitate youth sports sponsorships. We've been able to give over $12 million back over the last few years to youth sport organizations, to teams that pay for uniforms, that pay for registration fees, right? That give access to young girls, young boys that might not have that. And while that's a plug for TeamSnap, it's more of an urging to everybody here, use that influence, use that power to help improve the lives, the affordability, the accessibility, so that more kids can get out on the field, on the courts, on the rings.
Danette, take us home.
I think the most important thing for brands to understand is that if you understand how to intentionally invest, like everything that the panel said before us, the reality is there will be a business reason for you to be a part of each of these brands and each of these leagues and teams. But we really need you to understand that the intentional investment can also, your voice is very strong and big when there is problems. And there are problems right now in certain parts of the ecosystem. And if you use your voice and use your dollars to help to invest in those areas, your voice will actually help some of the things that we can't change federally or by the state, because all of a sudden, shocker, there's people and there's brands that want to invest in something that's where their biggest struggle is, whether it's the college level or others. When they have that funding and they have those resources, you'll actually elevate the entire ecosystem. I don't think brands understand that as much as I would like them to, that you can actually help change the challenges that we see, because investment not only helps build the businesses and the leagues that you heard from the last panel, but they change some of these problems, because half our battle has been, you don't want to invest in us. But when we can change that narrative and you can be educated on how to do it across the whole ecosystem, you are very powerful to make this change. And that's my hope.
Not just investment, but lack of investment, and saying we're not going to give you money anymore unless you create opportunities for girls and women as well. We're not going to support your brand unless you stop interacting with the women's space in negative and deleterious ways. We've seen that a million times. When something finally hits its tipping point, it's usually when the brands say we're leaving, and then all of a sudden people start to change. So tons of power in the room and tons of power on the stage. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.